What would you do if your homeowners association tried to control who could visit your own home? The smell of sizzling burgers filled the air as my sister Emily chased her giggling kids through the sprinkler, their laughter echoing across my backyard. After 6 long months apart, this weekend visit meant everything to me. I had moved to Willow Creek Estates just 3 months ago, lured in by its beautifully maintained parks and quiet, tree-lined streets. No one had warned me about Eleanor Thompson. I was flipping a burger when a sharp voice sliced through the warmth of the afternoon. "Excuse me. What exactly is happening here?" I turned, spatula still in hand, to see a woman in her 50s marching across my lawn. She wore a floral blouse buttoned up to her neck despite the summer heat and clutched a clipboard as if it were a weapon. Her blonde hair was styled in a way that screamed authority, though something in her pinched expression suggested she had very little patience for anything outside her control. "Just having a family barbecue," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I'm Ethan Carter, just moved in. Can I help you?" Her eyes swept across my yard, narrowing at the sight of Emily's minivan parked in my driveway. "Are these people registered guests?" I blinked. "Registered?" Emily glanced at me, confused, as her kids splashed behind us. "They're my family," I said. "They're visiting for the weekend." Eleanor's posture stiffened. "I'm Eleanor Thompson, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. According to our bylaws, all visitors must be registered with the HOA office 72 hours prior to arrival." I laughed, thinking she was joking. That can't be right. Nobody told me I had to register my own family. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's in the covenant you signed when you purchased this property, Mr. Carter. Page 47, Bylaw 3.12. Your visitors are unregistered. That's a violation." She pointed at my sister's van. "And that vehicle is parked improperly." Emily stepped forward. "The kids are just playing in the yard. We're not causing any trouble." Eleanor ignored her completely. "As HOA president, I must enforce community standards. Consider this your first formal warning." She scribbled something onto her clipboard. 3 warnings result in fines." I set down my spatula, trying to keep my voice even. "Look, I wasn't aware of this rule. Now I know. I'll register them first thing Monday." "That's not how it works." Eleanor's smile was tight, her voice clipped. "They need to leave immediately and return after proper registration." I stared at her, waiting for a sign that this was some kind of bizarre joke. But she wasn't laughing. From the patio, my father, Judge Richard Carter, stood slowly. At 65, he still carried the presence of a man used to commanding a courtroom without raising his voice. "Eleanor, is it?" he asked, stepping toward us. "Are you suggesting my grandchildren can't visit their uncle without paperwork?" Eleanor hesitated, her eyes darting toward him. "And you are?" "Richard Carter," my father said, his voice calm. "Federal judge, Eastern District." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Then, smoothing down her blouse, she lifted her chin. "Even judges must follow HOA regulations, sir. The rules apply equally to everyone." Dad nodded, as if considering her words. "Interesting interpretation," he mused. "I'd be curious to see the legal precedent supporting an HOA's authority to restrict family visitation rights on private property." Eleanor's face flushed. She cleared her throat. "The covenant is a binding contract, Judge Carter. Your son agreed to these terms." "Did the terms explicitly state that family requires pre-approval?" my father asked mildly. She hesitated for just a second too long. "It says all visitors," she said finally. Then, with forced generosity, she added, "I'll overlook this violation this time. But please ensure all future guests are properly registered." She turned on her heel and marched off. Dad exhaled, shaking his head. Interesting woman. Emily crossed her arms. What the hell was that? Neighborhood politics, I muttered. Probably nothing to worry about. But as I looked toward Eleanor's retreating figure, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just made an enemy. And I had no idea how far she was willing to go. I woke the next morning to a crisp white envelope taped to my front door. Willow Creek HOA violation notice was printed in bold at the top. Beneath it, in neat, precise handwriting, were 3 citations: unregistered visitor violation, $250 fine. Unauthorized vehicle parking, $500 fine. Noise disturbance, $150 fine. At the bottom, in all caps, payment due in 10 days. Further violations will result in escalated enforcement. I exhaled sharply, biting back a curse. I had barely unpacked in this neighborhood, and already the HOA was treating me like some criminal squatting on my own land. My father had warned me about people who confused authority with power, and now I was beginning to see exactly what he meant. By mid-morning, I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through emails when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Mr. Carter? This is Lisa from Human Resources. I straightened. Lisa from HR never called. We received a rather unusual complaint about you this morning, she continued, voice carefully neutral. A representative from your homeowners association contacted us regarding alleged disturbances and security concerns. My pulse ticked up. Security concerns? Yes, they claimed your property had been the center of multiple unregistered gatherings, that you disregarded local community rules, and that, quote, your actions had become a disruption to the neighborhood's peace. She paused. We obviously don't interfere in employees' personal affairs, but considering your role, this is concerning. I clenched my jaw. I worked in corporate consulting. Reputation mattered. If my employer believed I was a problem, it could damage my standing, maybe even my job. I can assure you, Lisa, these claims are nonsense, I said, forcing calm into my voice. It was just a family visit. Nothing illegal, nothing disruptive. I figured, she said. But I thought you should be aware. It's not every day we get formal complaints about an employee's home life. I thanked her, hung up, and tossed my phone onto my desk. My stomach burned. This wasn't just a fine anymore. Eleanor was actively trying to ruin me. Later that evening, I told my dad what happened. He listened in silence, fingers steepled beneath his chin. She's testing you, he said finally. Trying to see how much pressure you can take before you break. Well, she picked the wrong guy, I muttered. He gave me a long, measured look. I hope you're right. The next hit came harder. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind where everything felt slow and easy. My sister Olivia had come over with her husband Dan, enjoying the break from the renovations at their place. She was 6 months pregnant and already moving slower, rubbing her belly absently as she sipped iced tea on my porch. Then came the knock. Sharp. Insistent. I opened the door and found myself staring at 2 CPS agents. Mr. Carter, the woman in front asked, flashing a badge. We received an anonymous report regarding possible child neglect at this residence. We need to ask you some questions. My gut twisted. What? Behind me, Olivia stood, alarm creeping across her face. Child neglect? I don't even live here. The agents exchanged a glance. The report indicated that minors were living in unsafe conditions during an extended stay here, the man said. We're required to follow up on all complaints. I clenched my fists. Eleanor. Emily's kids had been here for 2 days. 2 days, running through sprinklers and eating hot dogs. Now, suddenly, there was a concern for their safety? This is a mistake, I said tightly. My sister and her kids visited for the weekend. That's all. Whoever reported this is using your system to harass us. We still need to conduct a wellness check, the woman said, voice firm but not unkind. Fine, I ground out. But this is a waste of your time. As I let them in, my phone buzzed again. Ben Walker, my neighbor. I stepped onto the porch to answer. Ethan, listen, he hesitated. I overheard Eleanor talking to Diane Reynolds outside the HOA office. She was laughing about how some people need a reality check before they learn to follow the rules. I don't know for sure, but... My grip tightened on the phone. You think they called CPS on us? Ben exhaled. I'd bet money on it. I watched through the window as Olivia struggled to hold back tears, CPS agents politely but intrusively checking over everything. Dan stood beside her, fists clenched. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was a deliberate attack. By the time CPS left, finding nothing, of course, Olivia was shaking with rage. This woman is trying to destroy our family, she hissed. And you're telling me the HOA has the power to just do this? Not legally, I muttered. But I knew people like Eleanor didn't care about legalities. They cared about control. I was done playing defense. I needed to fight back. But the HOA wasn't finished. Not even close. 2 days later, Olivia went into early labor. It was 5:30 in the morning when I woke to my phone buzzing off the nightstand. I groggily grabbed it, frowning at my sister's name on the screen. Jake, her voice was breathless, panicked. My water broke. My heart stopped. The baby, she's coming early. I was out of bed in an instant, yanking on jeans. I'm coming now. Stay calm. I raced to their guest room as Dan grabbed the overnight bag, Olivia breathing through another contraction. We need to go, Dan said, voice tight. We barely made it out the door before disaster struck. As I backed out of my driveway, blinding headlights flooded my vision. A black SUV blocked my exit. The driver's side door opened. Eleanor Thompson stepped out, arms crossed, lips curled into a smug little smile. Going somewhere? She asked, voice mocking. My vision went red. Move your damn car. My sister is in labor. Eleanor didn't flinch. Unregistered guests aren't permitted to leave without HOA approval. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was cruelty. And it was the last straw. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Olivia groaned in the passenger seat, her face pale, sweat beading at her temple. Another contraction hit, and she cried out, her hand gripping Dan's arm with bone-crushing force. But Eleanor didn't move. You are out of your damn mind, I seethed, throwing the car into park. Move your car. Now. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, as if considering the demand. Behind her, Martin Whitaker and Diane Reynolds, her loyal little enforcers, stood with arms crossed, watching like we were just another violation to document. Rules don't bend for emergencies, Eleanor said finally. If you had followed proper procedures. A strangled cry from Olivia cut her off. Dan exploded out of the back seat. Our baby is coming early, and you're standing here with a clipboard? Move the damn car. Martin pulled out his phone. Recording. For documentation purposes, he said smoothly. We have to maintain community standards. I could barely breathe. They were treating this like a power move. Call 911, I barked at Dan. He was already dialing, his hands shaking as he gave them our location. But I wasn't going to wait. I threw my car door open and marched straight for Eleanor. She actually smirked as I approached. You so much as lay a hand on me, and I'll have you charged with assault, she said. I wasn't going to touch her. I just wanted her to see my face. see the rage burning behind my eyes. "You think this is a game?" I hissed. "You think blocking a pregnant woman from going to the hospital is some power move? You're insane." She arched a brow. "I think people who ignore the rules create chaos. I think if we allow one exception, the entire community suffers." I took another step. "You listen to me very carefully, Eleanor," I said, voice deathly low. "If anything happens to my sister or that baby because of this, I will make damn sure that you regret this moment for the rest of your life." Eleanor blinked. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. But before she could respond, sirens split the morning air. The paramedics arrived within minutes, pulling the gurney out of the ambulance, but they couldn't park in my driveway. They had to haul the gurney around Eleanor's SUV. The sight of a screaming, laboring woman being wheeled past HOA board members holding clipboards seemed to finally shake some of the neighbors awake. A few had stepped out onto their porches, some murmuring, others filming. Mrs. Hill, the elderly neighbor from across the street, stepped off her porch, horrified. "Eleanor, what the hell is wrong with you?" she demanded. "This is HOA business, Doris," Eleanor snapped. Mrs. Hill didn't back down. "HOA business is flower beds and noise complaints. Not stopping a pregnant woman from going to the damn hospital." More murmurs. More cameras. The tide was shifting. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Fine," she said at last, her voice clipped. "I'll overlook this one violation." She stepped back into her SUV, pulled forward, and finally let me out of my own driveway. I didn't spare her another glance. I floored it to the hospital, the weight of Olivia's screams in my ears. By the time we got there, the doctors rushed her into the maternity ward. It was a rough labor. The baby was small, fragile, early, but alive. Dan collapsed into a chair next to me hours later, rubbing his face. "She's okay," he exhaled. "They're both okay." Relief hit me so hard I nearly felt dizzy. Then my phone vibrated. A new email from the HOA. Subject: Final notice of visitor restrictions. Due to repeated violations of Willow Creek Estates visitor policy, your family is no longer permitted within the community. Any unauthorized guests will be considered trespassers. I stared at the screen. The words barely made sense. They were banning my family from ever visiting me. Dan read over my shoulder. "They can't do this." "I don't think Eleanor cares about what's legal," I muttered, the rage simmering again. Then my father walked into the waiting room, his face unreadable. I handed him my phone. He read the email in silence, then exhaled through his nose. "Text me Eleanor and Martin's full names," he said quietly. I hesitated. "What are you going to do?" Dad met my gaze, and I saw something there I hadn't seen since he was an active judge in court. "Nothing illegal," he assured me. "But no one, threatens my family or endangers my granddaughter and walks away unscathed." I handed him my phone without another word. That night, while Olivia and the baby slept, my father made calls. By the time morning came, Eleanor Thompson's entire world was about to fall apart. By the time I got home from the hospital the next morning, my father was already up, sipping coffee at my kitchen table, his laptop open and a small stack of legal documents beside it. He looked calm, collected, dangerous. "I've been busy," he said, barely looking up as I walked in. I dropped into the chair across from him, rubbing a hand over my face. I hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours, but I didn't have time to be exhausted. "What did you find?" Dad pushed a sheet of paper toward me. "You were right. Eleanor's power trip isn't just about controlling the community, it's about money." I picked up the document and scanned it. My exhaustion burned away as rage took its place. It was a county record. Martin Whitaker's landscaping company had been receiving HOA contracts, at triple the market rate. The numbers didn't lie. Willow Creek Estates had been funneling money into a fake HOA budget and then redistributing it through fraudulent invoices, paying Martin's company tens of thousands of dollars a year for maintenance services that were never actually performed. But that wasn't the worst of it. "Look at this," Dad said, flipping to another page. "Eleanor and Martin have been foreclosing on homes under false pretenses. They stack up fines, push homeowners into default, then auction off the property, to themselves." I felt physically ill. "They've stolen homes," I muttered. "This is a scam. An entire operation." Dad nodded. "And they almost did it to you." I gritted my teeth. The fines they had slapped on me weren't about rules, they were a setup. "Eleanor planned to buy your house for half its value in an HOA foreclosure auction next month," Dad said. "If you hadn't fought back, she would have taken your home just like she's done to others." The realization made my skin crawl. I had known she was power-hungry. I had known she was vindictive. But this? This was criminal. And my father wasn't done. "Eleanor has been signing official HOA documents under a title she isn't legally allowed to use," he continued. "That alone is fraud. Add in the financial mismanagement, the selective enforcement of rules, and the false fines. This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore, Ethan. This is a case for the County Fraud Division." I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to focus. "What do we do?" Dad closed his laptop, his mouth curling into a small, knowing smile. "I made a call to an old friend," he said. "County officials will be at the HOA office first thing tomorrow morning. It's time to shut them down." The next morning, I was woken by the sound of car doors slamming. I stumbled to my window and pulled back the blinds. My heart nearly stopped at the sight below. 3 county government vehicles were parked outside the HOA office across the street. Men and women in business attire were carrying briefcases and file boxes inside. I grabbed my phone, barely registering the flood of text messages from neighbors. One stood out. "Maggie Hill, something big is happening. Eleanor looks furious." I threw on a shirt and bolted outside. A small crowd of residents had gathered, whispering as county auditors and fraud investigators walked straight into the HOA office. And standing on the steps, red-faced with barely controlled rage, was Eleanor Thompson. "You can't just barge in like this," she shrieked, blocking the door with her arms. "This is private property." A tall woman in a gray suit, someone who radiated authority, didn't even blink. She held up a thick stack of papers. "Under County Code 43.7, we have full jurisdiction to inspect all financial and operational records of registered homeowners associations," she said coolly. "You are required by law to comply. Refusal will result in criminal obstruction charges." Eleanor staggered back like she'd been slapped. Martin Whitaker burst through the door, still in his bathrobe, looking half asleep and confused. "What's going on?" "The county is auditing the HOA," a voice called from the crowd. I turned and saw Ben Walker, my neighbor, grinning. Martin's face drained of color. That's insane." "No," my father said smoothly as he stepped up beside me. "What's insane is fraudulently stealing money from homeowners under the guise of community fees." Eleanor whipped around, eyes blazing. "You! This is your doing." Dad merely smiled. "I told you rules are rules, Eleanor. I just happen to know which ones apply to you." The county investigators began hauling out files, cartons of financial records, HOA meeting minutes, and audit sheets. One of them whispered something to the woman in charge, and she nodded. Then she turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Thompson," she said. "Can you explain why your HOA has been operating under bylaws that were never legally filed with the county?" Eleanor's mouth opened and closed. She had no answer. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Neighbors looked at each other in shock. Wait, does that mean the HOA doesn't actually have power? All those fines, were they fake? A few people looked at me. They knew I had been the first to challenge Eleanor. For the first time, she looked scared. Why, you don't understand, she stammered. We've run this community for years. We have standards to uphold. If we don't enforce the rules, then what? I cut in, stepping forward. Then you can't force people to pay fake fines? You can't steal homes? Her nostrils flared. This is an attack on our community, she hissed. No, my father corrected. This is an investigation into criminal activity. A county investigator stepped out of the HOA office holding a folder stamped confidential. Ma'am, he said, glancing up. Would you like to explain why over $200,000 allocated for a community pool 3 years ago was wired to an offshore bank account? Eleanor stumbled back. And in that moment, I saw it. The exact second she realized she had lost. The neighbors around me weren't murmuring anymore. They were furious. You stole from us? You kept fining people while taking our money? A man in the front, someone I hadn't even met, threw his HOA violation notice onto the ground. This whole damn thing was a scam, wasn't it? I turned to my father. What happens now? Dad's expression was unreadable, but his voice was firm. Now, he said. Now the county prosecutor gets involved. Eleanor's face went pale. I crossed my arms, staring her down. This is just the beginning. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, the county froze all HOA accounts pending a full financial investigation. Within 48, Eleanor Thompson was officially removed from her position as HOA president. And within 72, news crews had descended on Willow Creek Estates, eager to unravel the story of how a suburban HOA president had run her community like a personal dictatorship, and nearly gotten away with it. I stood on my porch, watching as Eleanor and Martin were escorted from the HOA office in handcuffs, their faces ashen, their arrogance finally stripped away. Diane Reynolds, the HOA secretary, had already flipped, cutting a deal with prosecutors to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. The evidence was overwhelming: fraudulent fees, illegal foreclosures, falsified maintenance records, and a hidden offshore account filled with money stolen from homeowners over the years. The state attorney general's office had taken an interest, and from what my father had heard, the charges weren't just civil, they were criminal. The real bombshell came a week later when Eleanor, desperate to save herself, made a deal of her own. In a shocking court statement, she exposed a massive network of HOA corruption spanning multiple counties. It turned out Willow Creek Estates wasn't an isolated case. Her practices were part of a much larger scheme involving bribed county officials, fraudulent property auctions, and dozens of other communities trapped under the same kind of iron-fisted rule. The revelations led to multiple arrests, a county commissioner's resignation, and a full-scale investigation into how many people had lost their homes to this scam. But the best moment came when the community took back control. At the next emergency homeowners meeting, held under county supervision, the residents of Willow Creek Estates voted unanimously to dissolve the old HOA board. A new one was formed, one that actually followed the law. I had barely sat down when I heard my name called for nominations. Before I could even protest, the vote was in. By a landslide, the neighbors had elected me as the new HOA president. My first act? Abolishing the visitor registration policy. Effective immediately, families could visit whenever they wanted. No fines, no harassment, no power-hungry HOA enforcers lurking in the bushes. As I sat in my backyard weeks later, watching my nieces and nephews splash in the newly built community pool, funded, ironically, by the recovered HOA money, I realized something. It had started with a simple barbecue. A ridiculous rule. A power-hungry woman who pushed too far. But in standing up for myself, I had unknowingly helped free an entire community from years of corruption. Eleanor had been right about one thing: rules are rules. But in America, the most important rule is that no one is above the law. Have you ever felt powerless against an HOA or a Karen on a power trip? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.